Good morning, guys. Erin Wester here. So today is March 21st, 2017. It is my 3-year wedding anniversary. So I've been married to my husband now for 3 years. Yes, we have a 16-month-old baby, but I also have a 10-year-old. So how exactly does that happen? We've been married 3 years. We've been dating for 6. So, we've been together for quite a while. But my son is actually from a previous relationship. So my husband is not his biological father. Most of you know my story, but not everybody. Back in 2005, I met my son's father. I met him at a bar. Didn't know how old he was. Ended up that he was 8 years older than me. It ended up that he was, hey Patty, thanks. It ended up that he was an alcoholic, that he was a drug dealer, that he used marijuana and cocaine. Obviously all things that you don't want. But, I was just young and silly and was having my own issues with alcohol and low self-esteem, just all these horrible things. And he was exciting. He had all these tattoos. He played in a band. It was all the things that my parents didn't want me to date. And I think that's probably why I dated him. So, things went well for a while. We dated for about a year before we moved in together. And that is kind of when it all fell apart. That's kind of when I found out about his serious anger issues. But now that I am a domestic violence advocate and going through 40 hours of training, I know now that it wasn't anger issues. It was someone who is a very abusive person, someone who needs to have power over others. So a batterer, someone who is physically and emotionally violent with women in relationships. So yeah, it was pretty rough. And, as a survivor of domestic violence, people always wonder why I stayed. To be honest, I stayed because he made me feel like no one else would want me. He cut me away from my family and friends. So I was very, very isolated. I basically went to work, went home, and I was forced to pay all the bills because he kept losing jobs due to anger and violence at work. So it was just a horrible situation to be in. We hadn't been being intimate, but we went out for my birthday, and, I had a little too much to drink, let my guards down. I don't know if it was sexual relations that were pushed on me, or if I really was just drunk and I just did whatever, but had sex one time and got pregnant. He said he was going to change and everything was going to be different. We were going to raise this child. We were going to get married. And that was kind of how he said, I'll change, the honeymoon period of domestic violence. I'll change. I'll fix it. It'll be okay. One time he got violent while I was pregnant. He didn't hit me. He punched a wall. He broke stuff. He said, look, I didn't hurt you. I did this. Cops have been called numerous times. I wouldn't press charges. That's just how it was. And, he said, I think I have anger issues. Can you set me up with anger management? Yeah, obviously he wanted me to set things up for him, and he probably wasn't going to do it anyway. So, the next time he got physically violent, he actually did hit me. I was pregnant. I was like, no, I'm done. I left. They say that people who are in DV relationships, domestic violence relationships, have to leave 6 to 7 times before they officially leave. But I left. I was gone. I never went back. I'll be honest. I didn't want to have a kid. I was 26. This was in 2006. I didn't want to have a kid. I knew that I couldn't provide. I didn't have a college degree. I had been working at a bank, but obviously I left with no notice. So not a very good reference, because I just left. I fled, and I never really explained to them what was going on because I was so ashamed. My parents let me move home, but they said, you ever go back, we're not going to allow you to stay here, because they had no clue what was going on. They wanted us to get married. We were having a kid. We needed to get married. So obviously I had my son back in Lake Geneva with my parents. His dad was in Minneapolis. I don't even know if his dad would have had any contact with us if I wouldn't have had to tell him the name of the father and they went after him for child support. I don't think I ever would have heard from him again. But I don't know if it was a blessing in disguise, but when my son was 4, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and obviously went to court to say, thanks, Stacy, to say we are absolutely blessed. Patty, absolutely. So I don't know if diabetes was a blessing in disguise, but we obviously went to court and got his visitation suspended until he took his diabetes education classes. Obviously, he never took the classes. Haven't heard from him in 6 years, which is kind of crazy. I don't know how you would just not want to talk to your child for 6 years, but a blessing in disguise. And about a week after my son was diagnosed with diabetes, that is when I met my now husband. We met online. For real, we met online. And from the first date, I knew that he was the one for me. I know that's kind of weird, but I knew from the very first date that he was the one. And especially after he met my son, I was even more sure that he was the one. He just took to my son so well. My son loved him. We had been living with my parents that whole time, ever since my son was born. We had been living with my parents, both since I was 5 months pregnant. We'd been living with my parents. So when it was time to move out, this was about 4.5 years ago, we moved out and rented a place. He was my boyfriend at the time. And, we were a happy family. It didn't even make it seem like he wasn't his biological father. We never really even think of that. We think of my husband as his dad. He doesn't call him dad, which I don't know why he doesn't. He calls him Tim, but that's okay. You could say, well, why don't you go through the adoption process? Why don't you get a name change? Honestly, we don't want to rock the boat. We really don't want to bring him back in court. He's stayed out of our lives for over 6 years, and we just don't want to have to deal with that. I mean, people could say that's horrible. You should do the adoption process, but I think we had decided that if he ever tried to take us to court for anything to get his visitation reinstated, to change child support, whatever he wanted to do, I think that's when we would file the adoption paperwork. He's supposed to pay he's technically supposed to provide medical insurance for Jake, but my husband provides medical insurance for Jake. His dad has never provided him medical insurance. He's supposed to pay half the medical expenses. He's never paid a cent of medical expenses. So with type 1 diabetes and having to get specialty care at Children's every 3 months, it's expensive. He probably owes me over $10,000 in medical expenses, which is crazy to think about. But I think we're going to just use those medical expenses as a bargaining chip if we ever were brought back into court. Brought back to court, we would obviously definitely file for adoption and use the medical expenses as, hey, sign off on this. We'll forget the medical expenses. Because, it's not about the money. It's about his well-being, and his best well-being is not necessarily being adopted. His best well-being is to keep his father out of his life, because he's not a nice person. Unfortunately, the 3 times the cops came out for domestic violence incidents, I didn't press charges. So obviously, Minnesota's a little bit different than Wisconsin and Illinois, but there's literally no record. We don't make a police report. There's nothing. And, they could say, cops were called out there, but he could say that was me. So, he could say whatever he wants. I said that he had been abusive, but obviously in court, but he had said that I made him be that way, that I was to blame. It's my word against his. And luckily, due to his drug issues, he had to have supervised visitation. And he never got to have him in Minnesota. So that was a blessing. But, my son is 10 and I've been with my husband for 6 years. Well, it's dating 6 years, married for 3. Yes, my son is 10. Yes, he is not his biological father, but he is dad. you know, and everybody's life isn't perfect. Everybody isn't, I don't know. I don't know how to say what I want to say. But, yeah, it's our anniversary today. We both have to work, so it's not going to be a very exciting anniversary. Plus, I'm doing a live coaching event tonight at 7:30. So, besides that, that's the only work I'm going to do once I get home is I'm going to do my live event, and then I'm going to spend the rest of the night with my husband. So, no, we already went out for our anniversary, did all that kind of stuff. So, you know, life can be hard sometimes, especially, when you have that dread that he's going to come back to your life because, he was abusive. When he would have visitation, he would come down to Wisconsin and have him for a weekend for like 2 nights. And that whole entire weekend, I would have anxiety. I would have anxiety attacks. I was just so afraid of what he could potentially do to my son. I'm 37. So I went through all this when I was 25, 26 is when I was in the violent relationship, and we met in 2004. So, I mean, we'd been together for 2 years. But, it takes time for you to really see the abuse. And I think as I'm going through this domestic violence training, what I think is crazy is that, every single thing that they say are things like that I didn't even realize was abuse, like the control. There was just so much more control even before we moved in together that I should have known. It should have been a warning sign. But obviously, you're never going to know that someone's going to be violent and abusive. You're never going to know that. But that's really, I didn't mean to bring my anniversary down and talk about domestic violence, but, I'm not one of those people that had to leave 5 to 6 times. I left once. And yes, I was an alcoholic, but getting pregnant, I don't know, just maybe I wasn't as much of an alcoholic as I thought, but I do have addictive habits. Obviously, I have addiction to food. I use alcohol to cope a lot back in my early 20s. And, getting pregnant just absolutely changed my life. It made me leave and not go back. It made me stop drinking and stop using drugs. It made me go back to school and actually take it seriously. And, after getting kicked out of school for having a 1.3 GPA to end up graduating with a 3.8 when you came in with that 1.3 GPA is pretty awesome. And it shows you what life changes like that can really do and how they can really change you for the better. So, lots of horrible, bad things can happen, but they're there to make you stronger, and you wouldn't be given those things if you couldn't handle it. So I hope everybody has a fantastic Tuesday. Time to get some work done before the baby wakes up and before I have to go to work. So I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.